funding and fundraising.
Thank you, Sean. Can I just check everybody's able to hear me okay? Brilliant, thank you. I've got to say, first of all, how thrilled I am to meet you all. And the reason I'm so thrilled is because I worked with Sean, Mariana, and our former chief exec, Bill Freeman, on the Tackling Loneliness Through Transport bid at CTA. And it's one thing to be pulling a bid together and writing documents and all the rest of it. It's another thing to actually see you in front of me and to know that you're doing fantastic work with the funding that we did collectively manage to secure. So, you know, I'm really, really delighted that Sean invited me along this afternoon. I'm just going to try and share my screen with you. Let's see. Just take me a moment or two.
Shout if you get stuck.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's always that moment.
Yes, and I've got so many. Let's see, I've got so many files. Let's just have a look. Won't take me a moment. Now then. My internet has also been rather slow, I've got to say. I was actually kicked out of a meeting when my internet. Oh, we've got something on mine.
Yeah, yes. We've got you.
Is it showing in large format though?
It's large enough for everyone to see, I think.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right then, so I'm just going to cover some basic steps to successful fundraising this afternoon. And I should start really by just telling you a little bit about fundraising work that I've done previously, just so that you know I am legitimately here this afternoon. Before I worked at the Community Transport Association, I was a chief officer of a small charity in northwest England. It was a wonderful charity working with carers, and I absolutely loved working there. One of my responsibilities was income generation for the organisation. It was quite a small team. There were 10 of us delivering a lot of various projects and activities. But fundraising was really quite new to me. I'd started the job, really didn't have an idea, I suppose, about how to go about fundraising, so learnt on the job, and over time I like to think I got a little bit better at it, and the fundraising covered all sorts of aspects, from event fundraising, individual giving, grant fundraising was a significant part of it, tendering. I might have missed out one or two different income streams there, but just gives you a bit of a flavour, hopefully. Then I moved to Wales to take up a job at CTA, and was very fortunate because the job involved working with community transport organisations and other organisations to help them bring in additional income so that they could develop their services. So on the screen in front of you, it's just a few examples. Obviously, there's a lot of vehicles on there, but actually the types of grants that I was supporting organisations with, it was often for coordinator costs. It might be volunteer officer costs. It might be wheelchair accessible vehicles, minibuses. One of the vehicles you can see in front of you is actually a food van for a community transport scheme that started delivering meals. So very varied and very enjoyable. Something I felt was important for me personally was to try and get a better understanding of how funders think. So, oh gosh, it was late last year, I became a freelance grants assessor for a national women and children's funder. That's assessing small grants, but it gave me, or is still continuing to give me, such a good insight actually into grant applications from a different perspective. So I've always been on this side of the table asking for money. Now I have the opportunity to read through grant applications and think about giving money. So it's a really good sort of area of work which actually I feel personally helps me when I'm with organisations and developing funding applications with them now. Something I am very conscious of, though, is that there's an enormous amount of expertise in the room this afternoon. So I'm just coming with one particular sort of perspective, if you like. You've all got huge amounts of knowledge, experience in terms of your own fundraising capability. And whenever I talk to people about fundraising, I always come away feeling that I've learned something from a session, because when people share their own comments and ideas and tips after the presentation, that's when you start thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to take that away and use that. So this is as much about you as it is about me, really, this afternoon. So what will we cover? We're going to look at the fundraising cycle, developing a fundraising strategy, building a case for support, some basic housekeeping, showing your impact, and searching for funding. Now, as you can appreciate, we've got a fairly limited amount of time this afternoon, so this is going to be a broad brush approach. You will get the slides after the session, and also my email address is on the last slide, so you're very welcome to contact me after the session if there's anything you feel that you wanted to explore in a bit more detail. All right then, if we can move into just having like a quick question, and I'm hoping that you'll feel comfortable just jotting a few things down in the chat if you don't mind. I just wanted to ask you before we started, from your perspectives, what are the main elements in the fundraising cycle? Because this was something that I really had to think about when I first started fundraising, and I actually forgot one of the most important elements. So I'm quite interested to see your perspectives around this. So if we can just have a couple of minutes where people maybe just drop their suggestions in the chat. What things do you think about from start to finish with fundraising? Thank you, Sean. Yes, who are you applying to? That's going to be quite critical. Planning ahead of need, yes, absolutely. We'll be coming back to that. That does relate very closely to Helen's point as well, making sure you've got a pipeline of potential funders for the year. All part of that planning ahead, being proactive about your fundraising sort of like approach, I suppose. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Who is the target audience? Yes. Who's the funding for? Oh, some great content here. Different response times. Oh gosh, yes, for different funders. Oh, lovely, Laura. I'm so glad welcome to any newbies here, because this is all about, this sort of session is all about us learning from each other, and the more experienced here will share their tips and ideas, so you're very welcome. That's fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, so just going into the fundraising cycle then. If you can see at the top of the cycle, it says a clear fundraising plan, a fundraising strategy. Now, I've got to be honest, when I started fundraising many years ago, I won't say how many, I just sort of like launched myself into it thinking, right, we need funding for this project or this activity or this particular service, without actually having a clear plan. I hadn't put anything down on paper, hadn't developed a strategy that was linked to our strategic plan, and it was quite a scattergun approach. I've got to hold my hands up, really. But over time, I realised that that was wasting my efforts and the limited resources that we had within the organisation, and that I needed to get much more focused and develop a clear fundraising strategy. So really, the fundraising cycle, although I've got a clear plan, fundraising strategy, at the top here, it actually starts with your strategic or business plan, because that's really where you get a lot of your content for your fundraising strategy from. It's no good having a fundraising strategy that isn't aligned to your strategic plan, basically, because you'll be fundraising for the wrong things. It's always going back to your organisation's vision and mission, isn't it, really? All right. So the next thing is, once you've got your fundraising strategy in place, then it's really important to have a strong case for support. So your fundraising strategy is your internal document, quite dry, but thorough, giving you the nuts and bolts that you need to sort of like plan your fundraising activity. Your case for support is more of your external document, or it's a document that you'll use and adapt. You might cut and paste content from it into your external funding applications, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a moment. Then I've got putting your house in order. I can't really think of like another phrase for it. It is really that housekeeping element, making sure that everything is robust as possible before you do your applications, because you don't want to sort of like fall down at any first hurdles, really. The next item is identifying your prospects. I love to share the prospect onion with people, because that's just quite a good way of thinking about where to direct your activities. So we'll just touch on that briefly later. Once you've thought about your likely prospects, it is then about researching and applying for funding. And there's different databases you can use, different tips and techniques you can consider. But I have to say, one of the things that I was actually, that I needed to get much better at when I started fundraising was this element, which is around good stewardship. So for me, I would put enormous amounts of effort into the researching, applying, securing the funding, setting up the project. That was all brilliant, found it very exciting. But what I sometimes neglected was actually the stewardship element, keeping funders on board throughout the journey, making sure that I was thanking them regularly, sending them information and updates, and just trying to create a channel of regular communication. So over time, I obviously learned to get a lot better at that, but it is something that, you know, sometimes sort of maybe we don't put as much effort and resource into that element, and yet it can pay enormous dividends as well. So it's well worth thinking about that. And then, because it is a cycle, a very important part of the cycle is around monitoring and reviewing how successful fundraising activities are. And I think that really links into, we want to, well, everybody's so busy in smaller organisations or larger organisations, it doesn't really matter. There's always more demand than capacity, generally speaking. So it's about thinking, well, how can we be as smart as possible around our fundraising efforts? And that involves looking at your return on investment. Are some fundraising activities more successful than others? And once you do that little bit of analysis, then you can work out where you need to invest more time and effort for the next year. So that's also a really important part of the fundraising cycle. Okay. Obviously, just before I move on to the next slide, I should say as well that a really key part of any fundraising is around trying to diversify your fundraising, just to make sure that your organisation is as secure as possible. So, you know, it can be difficult because sometimes with organisations that I work with, sometimes they've had an enormous amount of support from one particular funder over the years. So it might be they've had a lot of support through the council administering the bus service operators grant, for example, and maybe they've been very dependent on that particular source of funding, or they might have had a source of funding from elsewhere. Whilst they may get some income in then from perhaps membership fees, passenger fares, small donations or smaller grants. It could be that for one or two organisations, primarily they're perhaps over-reliant on one main income stream. Now that can then be a risk to your organisation if that income stream suddenly dries up or reduces. So really a lot of fundraising strategy is around diversifying your income, just to make sure that your organisation is as sustainable as possible for the future. And as some of you very rightly pointed out in the chat, it is about taking that proactive approach and thinking about the funding timescales. So, you know, you'll know very well that if you're applying for smaller grants, it might take 3 or 4 months. If you're applying for larger grants, you could be talking 6 to 9 months, possibly longer. It just depends on the funder. So it's always, you're always having to sort of like plan ahead and think, well, what will we need in 12 months time or 6 months time? And start your planning now to get that income in so that you're not having to delay services or create a bottleneck, whatever it might be. Okay, so moving on to the fundraising strategy. Now this is a roadmap basically, and it asks three key questions. Where are we now? Where do we want to be? And how are we going to get there? Very simple at its, you know, most basic. That's what it is. It is an internal document. It needs to be proportionate to your organisation. So, you know, if you're a smaller organisation, you don't need a 20-page fundraising strategy. You might just need, it might just be two or three sheets of A4. If you're a larger organisation, it could be a very detailed document. Whatever is right for your organisation. But it is thinking strategically about your income generation. And for that, there are 3 documents which are useful. Firstly, your accounts, because that answers the question, where has our income come from in the past? It's really useful to sort of, you know, go back over a few years' accounts. This is particularly, I think, if you've come into an organisation that's well established and, you know, you might not be aware of all the long-standing history, so just going back through the accounts for 4 or 5 years can be really helpful just to see how income levels have fluctuated, the different sources and so on. But another key document is obviously your strategic plan, because that answers the question, what do we want to do in the future? Your plan might cover 3 or 5 years, it might be longer, but really that's where you're thinking about, well, these are our ambitions for the future, and breaking that down into thinking about, well, what do we need to actually get there? You also need your budget. Obviously, it can only be a sort of like an outline budget, but it's about how much is it going to cost you to achieve what you're hoping to achieve in your strategic plan. So it's just thinking through some of the straightforward questions really that need answering. And I think as well, I think your fundraising strategy is about, it's also a really useful opportunity to think about the strengths in your organisation around fundraising. So sometimes you might have people on your board who are absolutely excellent at a particular stream of income generation. They might have contacts with funders, for example, or they might be really good at event organising. It just depends. Or you might have people with those skills within your volunteer base or within your staff team. So it's just a good opportunity to think, you know, it doesn't always just have to be the responsibility of one person around fundraising in an organisation. Sometimes by default it sort of falls onto one person's shoulders. It could be in a smaller organisation they just have a coordinator and some part-time admin, for example, or in a larger organisation even. There's different challenges really. But I suppose what I would say is that it can be really important or helpful to think of fundraising as a team effort. So, you know, sharing information about your strategic plan and your fundraising strategy with your volunteers or supporters, with people who are involved in your organisation, and getting them to think, okay, how can we help in the fundraising efforts, can be quite useful. Move on. In terms of content, I mentioned briefly it does need to be appropriate, proportionate to the size of your charity or organisation. There's some key things that is helpful to cover, just very basic. You know, you do like the general introduction, but then go into an analysis of your fundraising history. What's worked well for your organisation? Is it grant fundraising? Is it tendering, or you know, getting donations in, or individual giving, whatever it might be? It's just thinking about, well, what are our strengths? What can we build upon? And perhaps also, are there areas we might like to explore? And how do we go about that? It's thinking about how much you need to raise and for what purpose. The funding that you've already got in place. So if you've already got secured income streams, that's obviously a really good starting point, but it's then giving you that sort of like added motivation really to think, well, we've got 50% of what we need secured, but we know to develop our service over the next year, we're going to need this amount, and think about where you might get that funding from. I always like to do a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, because internal and external challenges are changing all the time. So it can be quite helpful just to get like a little snapshot really of your funding situation. Then your strategy might cover potential income streams, funders that you think, well, they might be quite good to approach. Perhaps they've supported your organisation in the past, or other organisations you're aware of who work in the community transport sector get funding from X, Y and Z, and you think that might be a good starting point for your organisation as well. It's also about, oh, I've jumped ahead. It's also about thinking of the resources required to support your fundraising activity. There's always a cost to your organisation, whether that's staff time or whether it's, it might be you might need to pay for like a fundraising database subscription. If you're putting on events, there might be costs to those events. Whatever the resources you think you might need, it's important to just sort of like include those in your fundraising strategy, and then have an action plan for the first year with some key review points, because obviously, like any document, it's only as good as how much you use it, how robust it is, your active monitoring of success and feedback. It's that cycle where you're keeping your activity under constant review, feeding back to your trustees or your staff team, and just keep thinking, well, this is working, this isn't, let's drop that activity and focus on this or that. So I mentioned briefly SWOT analysis. This is very basic, obviously, but I sometimes think keeping it simple can be actually really helpful. So your SWOT analysis, your internal factors are your strengths and weaknesses within the organisation. These are things where you think about, well, actually, what do we do really well currently? What assets do we have effectively? But also, where might we need to strengthen or change our activity or how we do things? Then your external factors are the opportunities and threats. It's always good, you know, people talk about horizon scanning. It is always good to sort of take a look around and just think, well, what factors are out there that might actually affect our organisation? And to do this sort of periodically so that you can just keep abreast of any changes and think about risk management, I suppose, in some aspects when you're looking at the threats. But more importantly, it is around taking advantage of opportunities. And you can only do that if you're aware of what those opportunities are for your organisation. So just very practically, you know, strengths for your organisation, that might include things like your track record. So some of you on this call, you might have been established for 15 or 20 years or more and have an excellent track record of delivering services, fulfilling funder aims and objectives, meeting all your targets, excelling at outcomes. You know, that's a fantastic strength. Even if you're a newer organisation, you may still have a lot of that to promote as well. You might have exceptional community buy-in. Many community transport organisations are fantastic at getting so many local supporters, whether that's volunteers or other stakeholders, as supporters of the organisation, because people can see the value of what you do. You might have good funder loyalty, so you might have had contracts with the council or the health board or funding via BSOG for many years. You know, that's another factor where you're saying, well, actually, we've proved our track record and our ability to deliver projects or services. And the fundraising experience within your organisation, whether it's on your board, in your staff team, or amongst your volunteers. Weaknesses, often, to be honest, a lot of it is around a lack of staff time and capacity for fundraising. Sometimes you find that fundraising is very much sort of seen as just an add-on to people's jobs. It's just one task amongst 101 other tasks, and it's quite challenging. It is, you know, really to have the time to do all the research and applications that are needed, really, just to keep an organisation going these days. Or it might be that an organisation is new to a particular fundraising activity. So it might be an organisation who says, well, we haven't applied to the lottery before, or we haven't submitted a tender. You know, there can be specific areas of work where an organisation might say, OK, we need to sort of like just up our skill level around this. It could be that an organisation is so busy delivering services that I've put here shop front needs updating. By that, I mean things like a website the information on a website might be out of date or seem a little bit static, or I'm just trying to think. Annual reports are produced, but maybe not as maybe there could be more to actually really present the impact of the organisation within those sort of corporate documents, if you like, whether it's your annual report, your annual impact review, if you produce something like that, or other documents, really. I'm putting it all under that shop front sort of heading. Or it might be an organisation simply has very limited unrestricted income. They might be really good at getting a lot of grant funding for projects, but actually not have a nice cushion of unrestricted reserves that they can rely on for a rainy day. And that can then potentially be a bit of a risk factor for an organisation. You know, in the case of a late payment or a funder suddenly reducing the grant support it offers, whatever it might be, is really good to make sure that there's a sort of satisfactory safety net for an organisation. But all of these factors, it gives you something sort of constructive to work with. This is why I like the SWOT analysis, really, because you look at your weaknesses and you turn them over time into strengths, because you start putting your resources into that section, looking at what you need and so on. Your opportunities, I mean, in the CT sector, you're so good at partnership working and collaborative effort, and there might be lots of opportunities through the Tackling Loneliness project, you know, to sort of like work up some joint applications potentially. It just depends what you're doing and how useful that might be. But if it's not through the Tackling Loneliness connections that you're making, I'm sure that there's other community connections that, you know, you have a wealth of that you might be able to develop as well. And I think as well, it's thinking about the importance of community transport to different policy areas. You know, there's a lot around social isolation, social prescribing, green prescribing, transport to health, climate change, all these different elements where you could actually angle a community transport bid around. It's just about being a little bit savvy about how you word your applications potentially, so that you've got the widest possible spread of funders to apply to. And obviously there's a lot in the news at the moment around, you know, more integrated transport policy. So it's thinking potentially, if it's relevant for your organisation, how can your CT service fit into that? That might be around first mile and last mile support. It might be around helping people connect to their local train stations or interchange hubs, whatever it might be. So just thinking what's on the horizon that you might be able to use for your organisation. Threats, well, usually quite a lot of those about. One might be the legislative framework. I'm trying to think, you know, there was quite a lot, wasn't there, really, just a couple of years ago around CT and the legislation. So, you know, it's just being aware, again, making sure that you are plugged into any CTA advice drop-ins or campaigns or initiatives, just to keep abreast of any changes to regulation or legislation that might affect your services. A very current one is the cost of living crisis and how that might be affecting your volunteers. So, in Wales, we're hearing of some volunteers in their 70s going back to work and giving up volunteering because they're just having to bring more additional income into their households, and they're saying quite bluntly they can't actually afford to volunteer anymore. So that's potentially a significant threat to the sector, because many operators like yourselves are so heavily reliant on volunteers. They do such a fantastic they play such a fantastic role in the organisations. So it would be very interesting to see how that plays out, really. There might be other cost of living sort of factors to be aware of. And also there might be increased competition in your area. I'm not quite sure if that applies to you, but it's just thinking through some of the factors that might apply. So we have actually got just a blank strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats template that we're going to send out to you afterwards. So feel free just to have a go, see what you come up with. You'll probably think of lots of different things tailored to your organisation, but that can be quite useful as a simple exercise to do. All right. So moving on then to case for support. This is your engaging argument, really, as to why funders should support your work. So there's a quote there from the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, which says, "A strong and emotive case for support is one of the most powerful tools you can have as a fundraiser." So I said a little bit earlier that your fundraising strategy is your internal document. Your case for support, this is something, so I'm just going back to where I used to work as, you know, managing a small charity. So what I would do once I had the fundraising strategy in place, I tended to use it for particular projects. So I might think, well, I'd like to set up a project, you know, developing a befriending service, for example. So I might develop a case for support for developing a befriending service. But some organisations create a case for support for the organisation as a whole, or you can have a mix of the two. You can have one for the whole organisation and then one for particular projects that you're going to try and develop over the next couple of years. It's very much dependent on what works for you as an organisation. So your case for support, I would pull together information from different sources, really. That might include things like local and national policies, so that I could reference them in the case for support, case studies, photographs, testimonials, obviously our standard documents, policies and procedures, annual report and reviews, whatever it might be. And then from those documents in that file, I would then pull out quite a concise case for support. And that might, again, just be a couple of pages long, but I would then use that case for support as the basis when I was doing funding applications generally. So again, it's a bit like having something that you can easily copy and paste into your funding applications without you having to each time start afresh. So it was just sort of like a shortcut, really. And then I would use the case for support in comms messaging. So, you know, thinking about trying to develop a befriending service, I'd make sure that there was consistent messaging across the website, social media, as well as in the funding applications. So that you're sort of like, you're getting your supporters sort of thinking about the needs that you're trying to address. So the three main elements of a case for support then. Firstly, what's the need for your work? Secondly, what activities will you do? And thirdly, what difference will you make? So the need, this is where you think about why your organisation exists in the first place. What's your mission, vision and values? What motivates and drives your work? And really, you're aiming to connect people to your work on an emotional level. That is actually really key. If you take away just one thing from today, I really hope that you'll take that point. It's about that human interest, connecting with people. So, for example, often when I'm going through grant applications, people start with saying, well, we need this. This is from our organisational perspective. We need a minibus, we need a coordinator, or we need these resources or that resources, and that'll then help us deliver our mission, if you like. But actually, you have to sort of turn that on its head and start with, well, actually, it's not about the organisation, it's about the difference you make to people's lives on a daily basis. And community transport operators, it's never about transport, is it? Obviously, that's, you know, the nature of what you do, but actually it's about connecting people, enabling people to see their family and friends, helping them to get out, feel less isolated. Just those very real day-to-day human interaction with between the driver and the passenger that actually lifts the passenger's mood, helps them feel less lonely, feels connected to their community. It's thinking about actually the minibus or the coordinator or the other costs is a secondary thing. Why your organisation exists is to connect people and to help them live fulfilling lives and do all the things that everybody else takes for granted. So you're aiming to connect whoever's reading your application to your work in that way. You do have to describe your activities. So if you're setting up a befriending service or whatever it might be, outlining what that service will offer, how it will work, setting your work in context within your community, and also how you work alongside other organisations. And that's a really key one, because from a funder's point of view, they hate it when organisations seem to be operating in splendid isolation. They actually really worry about organisations that don't seem to be connected or don't get their partnership working and collaborative working across strongly in an application, because they would think, well, gosh, they're not really networked in to their local community. How do we know that they're going to be effective if that's not the case? So it's always thinking about, you know, I know you're well networked and connected, but really don't hesitate to put that quite strongly in any application. And also, your overall aim is about instilling trust as well and showing how effective you are. Funders really like it when you sort of like demonstrate your track record, when you inspire them with confidence and you can actually point to evidence of your impact. Very simple things. Moving on to difference. Yeah, I have touched on that. Focus outwards, not inwards. Talk about the impact your services have. not your organisational needs. Relate the difference you make to your mission, vision and aims. State the difference clearly, give positive examples. Really, really important. So that's rather small type on my screen, so I won't actually run through it in detail, but it's just an example of a description of need, activity and difference. So when you get the slides, you know, you can have a look at that, think about applying it to your own organisation. I'm sure many of you have much better examples than this already, but it's just in case you needed it. So it's being very clear. In your case for support, always think need, activity, difference. It gives you just that little structure to work around, really. So I just wanted to ask another quick question, actually, and this is thinking about the funder's perspective when they're looking at, say they've got, you know, a number of applications on their desk, they're going through them. What are the red flags do you think they might come across that raise, what are the things, if they're reading an application, that might raise some questions in their mind? So I wonder if we could just again take a few minutes just to pop anything you can think of in the chat. That would be fantastic. Some great ones coming in already. The stability of the organisation, yes. Lack of costing details, absolutely. Have they been funded before? Yes. Have they got a track record? It's that thing again. Vague timescales. Assessment of future sustainability. If I don't have sufficient funds for the next, yes, the project might not succeed. Oh, so good. Have they managed other projects successfully? Brilliant. You see, I do feel that some of you should be up here presenting the next session around fundraising. So thank you very much for that. If you think of anything else, feel free to just pop it. Oh, there's more coming in. Unrealistic expectations. Yes. Lack of research with potential partners, clients. That's a good one. Yes, because that's back to demonstrating the need for the project. Can they deliver the project they're applying for? Oh, these are so good. Yes. All excellent. I'd also thought of some other ones as well that I'd like to just touch upon briefly. So one might be any red flags in your annual report and accounts. For example, have you got a particularly low level of reserves or a particularly high level of reserves? Now, there might be a case, there might be a simple explanation for either. So it might be that there's a high level of reserves because trustees want to keep a certain amount of funding for vehicle replacement, or it could be a low level of reserves, maybe because there's been some recent expenditure around service development, and now the trustees are building up that level of reserves again, whatever it might be. But just be aware that that is something that funders immediately have a look for. Again, as well, some funders take a very different attitude towards reserve levels. So some might be quite happy if you've got up to 12 months reserves, unrestricted reserves. Others might say, no, we want to fund smaller underfunded charities. So if you've got more than 6 months reserves, we're unlikely to fund your organisation. So again, it's just being aware that they have very different attitudes to reserves, really. Also, they will check on the Charity Commission or Companies House or other regulators' websites just to make sure that your filing is up to date and has been on time. Now, sometimes there can be very genuine reasons why an organisation might have filed accounts late with the regulator. So, for example, it could be due to staff sickness, difficulties within the organisation that have now been addressed. if that's the case, and you think that there's something that might raise a red flag with a funder, just put an explanatory note somewhere in your application. Sometimes there's questions, oh gosh, I'm just trying to think. It can be difficult to know where best to put that sort of explanatory note, but sometimes there's some question in any application form or online application process where you think, okay, I can actually just put something in there just to explain that particular issue. If you can do that, do it, because then it just means that you're reassuring the funder. Are policies and training records up to date? Obviously, safeguarding I've put there because that's a key one, but there might be other policies that need to be checked, updated, just to make sure that if a funder is asking for a particular suite of policies, that there's no information missing or outdated, really. I do tend to find personally, when I'm assessing application, that is actually the one thing that just slipped through the net sometimes with organisations. And I used to, you know, from my own experience managing a charity, you try and keep on top of the policies and procedures, but sometimes because they were being updated at different cycles, one might slip through the net and not have been updated at the time it should have been. So it's just making sure that those are all signed off by the trustees, that there's that they're signed and dated, that there's a review date on the policy, you know, all these very simple measures really. Also, funders look to see if there's a robust trustee board. They want to make sure that there's a good level of leadership expertise, whether that's at trustee board level or at senior leadership level. So again, it's getting across in any application the skills, the wealth of skills on your trustee board and within your management team as well, because again, that's going back to inspiring confidence in the funder. Another red flag might be, not all funders will ask, but some will, have any contracts ended early? Have you defaulted on any contracts? Has there been any issues with any contracts? And again, it's important to be honest, but also to, you know, also to reassure, because again, there can be very genuine reasons for contracts ending early. So it's just something to think about, really. So some of the other things around housekeeping, obviously, a very basic one is making sure that you meet the grant criteria. So sometimes funders say that they have to discard a certain percentage of applications. And this is such a shame when organisations have gone to the trouble of filling out an application form. It all takes time and effort, but they failed to meet a specific grant criteria. So it's just making sure that any documentation the funder supplies, that you've gone through that in great detail and you're very aware of all the different things that you need to sort of like tick off. It's making sure the project manages the grant programme or the funder's aims. So it's about thinking about the language they use, thinking about what they're hoping to achieve and how you can help them to achieve it. Somebody said in the chat about like a project being too general or vague, and that is actually really key. If you're applying for funding for a project, it needs to be really specific, clearly described. The funder doesn't know anything about your organisation, so they have to be able to very quickly assess what you're going to be doing, when you're going to be doing it, how it will be delivered, who by, what the outcomes will be, blah, 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 you know. Also, they're looking for great evidence of impact. You know, we will touch on that slightly in a few minutes. They want, well, I should say that this does differ greatly from funder to funder, but some funders have quite a risk-averse attitude. So they're looking for applications that are low risk. So that's where they can see that you've got a great track record, excellent governance and leadership, that they feel confident that you'll be able to deliver the project. Other funders take a slightly more adventurous approach to risk. So again, it's just trying to pick up from the information they provide, reading their reading information on their website, looking at who they've funded previously, reading their annual review and accounts, just picking up as much information as you can about that particular funder. Obviously, we've touched on working in partnership, but the other thing that we haven't really touched on yet is funders love it when you describe how the user voice is heard at different levels of the organisation. So this might be, you might have on your trustee board people who have used your services in the past, or it might be you've got a driver, that could be a volunteer driver or passenger assistant on your trustee board. It could be that you've got some sort of user group where you meet perhaps a couple of times a year to sort of get feedback from people who use your services. It could be the volunteers, and that's another aspect. It's not always just the beneficiaries, but volunteers who have the opportunity to give constructive feedback and are involved in different ways within the organisation. All of those sorts of factors are actually really key to getting funders interested in what you do these days, because what they hate is organisations who sort of have a we know best, we know what's best for people attitude. They want people with lived experience to be centrally involved within the organisation. Okay. So I thought it could be helpful just to have a couple of quotes. So you've done all your housekeeping and you're thinking about ways to make your application stand out. I have mentioned earlier about trying to do this on a human level, connecting with people. I really like these two quotes. One is from Comic Relief. They say, "Don't be afraid to bring personality into your writing and use this opportunity to centre the perspectives of your beneficiaries. We want to be inspired by words that lift off the page to tell a compelling and brilliant story." Garfield Weston Foundation say, "Our trustees enjoy reading applications that are brought to life with images and one or two case studies that illustrate the impact of an organisation's work. If your work has an emotional impact or brings you joy, you can tell us that too. A balance between head and heart can make a proposal much more compelling." So really, they're saying the same thing, aren't they? Make it human. You know, when I'm assessing a stack of applications, time after time, I'll see ones that start with, "Our organisation was set up 20 years ago and we deliver accessible transport in the area of such and such." And I think that's great. You know, the work is very laudable. But actually, when I see an application that starts something along the lines of, I don't know, "George is 73. He has no family. He can't get out. Our service is an absolute lifeline for him. We help him meet up with friends on a regular basis." You know, immediately I'm thinking, oh, I like this application. It's got my interest. So it's just thinking about, in a way, it's sort of like writing in a more sort of like, I suppose, a bit like a journalistic style, really. You do need to get the other information in about your organisation, its track record, its history. All of that is really important. But just think about how can you make your application stand out from a pile of other applications and hook the funder's interest so that they think, oh, I love the sound of this. The passion for the work, the enthusiasm is leaping off the page and I want to find out more. I want to know, how do they help George? You know, what is the benefit for George? What's the impact of this organisation's work? So you've got them interested. I have actually put, well, I've sent Nikki and Sean, they'll send it out afterwards, just a very simple a one-page sheet around some of the principles for developing case studies, because these are a fantastic way to actually get that human interest element into your funding applications. Now, often I see a lot of excellent stuff on websites, you're gathering this sort of information all the time, which is great. It's just building on that and making sure that you thread it through all your applications so it comes out really strongly. And it's thinking about different people that you can get case studies from. So a lot of the time we automatically think about our beneficiaries, don't we? We think, well, the people who use our service, it'll be fantastic to get their perspectives, and it is. It's really powerful, moving stuff. But there are other people in your circle that it's really helpful to get case studies from as well. So it might be your volunteer drivers. What motivates them to be involved? I've heard volunteer drivers say that their volunteering role is what gets them up in the morning. Now, why is that? Dig down into that and get some really great examples. It might be your staff and trustees. Ask your staff, ask your colleagues or your trustees, what are you most proud of? What do we do really well? What stories have stuck with you throughout the years? And you can guarantee people will have half a dozen stories that they can recount, and it's capturing it on paper, isn't it? And just making sure that you've got that content then that you can use. Something which is more really testimonial than case study is getting quotes from your funders and partners. So if there's any organisation that you've been working with on a regular basis, for example, through COVID, you did fantastic work with food banks, pharmacies, GP surgeries, other organisations, capturing some of the quotes from them around the benefit of working with you, what they felt the added value was of you working together, anything like that. It can simply be, you know, 1 or 2 sentences, but it can be so powerful, and it just brings it to life. Rather than you saying in a form, we work in partnership and we add value, you say, here are a few quotes from people we've worked in partnership with over the last 12 months. This is what they directly say to us. And with funders, ask them, what do they value most about your service? What do they think makes your service different? Why do they keep funding you? You can get some really rich information out that way. Now, before I came onto this call, I had a very quick look. I've been very cheeky. I've taken some information of North Norfolk Community Transport website. So I'm not sure if anybody's here today, but I didn't have a chance to ask for your permission beforehand, but I just love these on your website. Pictures and quotes. Gentleman there saying, oh, it's so good to be collected from home, driven safely, cared for, and deposited back home feeling secure. One sentence, but summarises really nicely that feeling of security that a community transport service can offer. The next lady, these excursions enable me to visit places that I couldn't otherwise get to. Thank you. Such a simple comment, isn't it? The gentleman at the end, you make an enormous difference. I can get out and about from my home and I feel independent. Oh, you know, feeling independent, that is so, so important for any of us. And that's something that a funder will connect with. Those sort of very simple statements. I love the images as well, you know, because I do think having the combination of image and comment works really well. So thank you very much, North Norfolk, if you are on the call. That I just loved it. I looked at a few of your websites and there's some fantastic stuff on there actually. So you've already got a lot of impact content. So it's just pulling it out, keeping it in one place, trying to do what you can throughout the year to sort of add to your library of impact content really. Okay, so moving on, just very briefly. So you've got your house in order, you've got your impact, your case studies, your quotes and testimonials. Thinking about searching for funding. So this is the prospect onion, which I love because it's meant to be a slice of red onion. So you start with your most likely prospects in the centre. That's the white heart of the onion, and then you work outwards through the layers of the onion to explore other prospects. So the white centre of the onion is your sort of hot prospects, if you like, your current funders. Can you expand continuation funding with them. For example, if you're funded by the lottery at the moment, are you going back to them with a development plan so that they can continue funding you for another 3 to 5 years? Any funders who are regularly funding you, perhaps from the health board or local authority, are you having regular conversations with them about other areas of work that you might be able to help them with? So it's thinking about starting with those already committed supporters, if you like, and how you might be able to develop aspects of your work that are still hitting their programme aims, but that might actually bring some new income into your organisation as well. Then you might want to think about funders who have given to you in the past. This is where, you know, I said earlier about perhaps going through your previous annual reports and accounts, just looking at who's funded you. Have there been any charitable trusts that have funded you in the past, or other funders where you could actually make a renewed effort to contact them and say, we really valued your support previously. We've developed enormously in the however many years since you last supported us. Can we give you an update on some of our plans, talk to you about a couple of funding proposals we've got in mind? So again, you're starting with a warm prospect there. And it can be worth doing, you know, because I'm thinking again about the organisation I used to work for. We had a lot of funding from, let me think, it was the Tudor Trust. And then we had a break for a few years, and then we went back to them and said, this is how we developed because of your support in the first instance, and this is how we'd like to develop going forward. We had the opportunity to talk to their grant manager, persuaded them to give us an extra 3 years funding. So, you know, sometimes you feel a little bit cheeky doing that, but it always comes back to the beneficiaries, doesn't it? You know the value of what you do, and you soon get over any feeling of being cheeky because you want to do the best you can for the people who rely on your service. And actually, funders, they do vary in whether they like those unsolicited approaches, but if you've had funding from them before, I always say it's worth the attempt. Then you might want to think about likely funders. Whoops, I've jumped again. And that's thinking about people who might be interested in the work that you do around social isolation, volunteering, community cohesion, climate change. So that's where you might need to do a little bit of research. And again, thinking about other prospective funders, doing a bit of research on who's funding your competitors, so to speak. So for example, the organisation I used to work for, I would actually I'd go onto websites of competitors, check out their annual reports and accounts, and just see who's funding them. And I did actually spot a couple of funders that were new to me and was able to go to them and say, well, actually, I know you funded similar work in this area. How about having a look at what we do? So again, it's just doing that little bit of digging and research, really. And thinking about the 3 C's to assess how responsive potential funders might be. And the 3 C's are connection to you, concern for your cause, and capacity to give. So again, you're always thinking, how can you create that connection and that empathy with your cause, or how can you show that there's an alignment between your cause and the funders' aims and objectives? And also, obviously, their capacity to give. When did they open grant programs? How much are they giving out in the grant programs? Is it worth your time and effort, really, to follow up that particular connection? And searching for funding, if it's grants, there's some really useful databases. So in your next funding application, you might already have access to a grant funding database, but if you haven't, it can be worth putting in a little element in your application to say, as part of your budget, we'd like to fund, you know, 1 year subscription to Grants Online or the Directory for Social Change Funds Online database, whatever it might be, whatever's reasonable for your organisation. It can be really good to see if you can get a funder supporting that cost for you. Also at CTA, we do have access to Grants Online. So You know, it's quite a cost effective way to keep up to date with any new funding sources, and I find it really helpful because they send you email updates around this funding has just opened, these are the criteria. It just saves you having to do all of that research yourself. So it might sound expensive, some of these grant funding databases, but generally I found that they've been worth their weight in gold. So I've used different ones in the past, and you know, it might be a couple of £100 a year, but if it results in like a 20 or 30,000 successful grant application, then that's money well spent if that's a funder that I would never have heard of before. So it's well worth thinking about that. And also there's some really useful heavily subsidised fundraising courses and workshops run by the Foundation for Social Improvement. So I've just added a link in there, because whereas the average market value of a training day on fundraising could be around £300, the Foundation for Social Improvement's courses start at only £20. It depends, they've got criteria, it depends obviously, that price might vary slightly, but it's still massively discounted from having to pay sort of like the going rate for a fundraising course, and the content of their courses seems exceptional as well. So just a few sort of pointers that you might want to explore. What I would also add is that tendering can also be, you know, you might already be tendering, I don't know, but that can be another source of funding. So although I have really focused the presentation more around grant applications, tendering could be productive. It just depends on your organisation, the size of it, the resources you have, and so on. And it is actually very similar to your grant applications in terms of the things that you have to think about. So there's just a very simple checklist there. It's about creating a project plan, coordinating the information you needed, because obviously tendering, it's slightly more formal, I would say. So it's about making sure that you have like a little project team to support you. That might be trustees or volunteers who you can allocate tasks to. They often have a very clear scoring approach and weightings. That's different from your general funding applications, but it's very useful to see that scoring approach, because then you can guide your answers and content around it to make sure you get the maximum marks for any tender. And a lot of it is around providing evidence, demonstrating clear understanding of mitigating risks, filling the gaps, showing how your service complements others, but also, I think importantly, demonstrating value for money. And that's not always about actual pounds and pence. It's about what can you deliver that adds value. Because it's thinking about, well, community transport, you're saving the NHS, aren't you? You're saving demands on the NHS. People who are lonely tend to go to their GP surgery more frequently, not necessarily because of physical health problems, but it could be more around mental health problems. Whereas if you're providing a service that's getting people out and about, you might be providing some befriending element or other elements, then you're reducing the impact on the NHS accordingly. You might be getting people to hospital appointments, reducing the risk of did not attends, which has a significant cost to the NHS. You might be adding social value in other ways. There's loads of different ways in which you add that extra value. So it's just making sure that you get that across in any tender exercise. And as well, it's thinking through what are the extra things that you might need to be aware of. So I haven't done tendering whilst I've been at CTA, but I did do it previously. And often it would involve a pre-qualification questionnaire. So that's really back to your housekeeping, making sure all your policies and procedures are up to date, filling out some basic organisational information. But it might also be thinking about if you need to deliver a presentation to a tender panel. There's some added factors just to be aware of, but it can actually be quite useful for some of the larger sort of like funding opportunities. So I'd just say there's a couple of links there. If it's something that you're already exploring or want to explore, you've got the CHEST procurement portal. It's an opportunity to look for councils tendering for transport services, home to school services or home to daycare facilities. Often you might just need to register to go on their dynamic purchasing system. You might not have to complete a full tender. So just have a look at what's out there really. And there's a contracts finder and a tender finder link there as well. So we won't go into it in a lot of detail because I'm not really sure what applies for your organisation, but I just wanted to include it in case. Now then, we're right at the end of the presentation, and I would just say that if you would like any constructive feedback on any draft applications that you're doing, please don't hesitate to contact me. So there was a gentleman yesterday, he drafted some text, wasn't sure about submitting it, so he said, do you mind just having a look at this and giving me a bit of practical feedback? And I was more than happy to do that. If you have ideas for other funding topics, please let us know. That might be useful for when we're planning advice drop-ins. I know the development officers are always thinking about future sessions that they might be able to put on. So if you think, well, I might want to know more about the nuts and bolts of putting a fundraising strategy together, or good stewardship or monitoring, whatever it might be, anything, just email Sean and Nikki after the session, and it's something that we can circulate to the development officers. And I should also give a plug to your local CVSs, because they're often a really good source of information and advice around funding and fundraising. Some have funding development officers, others have whole fundraising development teams, but they can be so helpful again in giving that constructive feedback, advice, providing information about forthcoming funding opportunities. So I'm sure you're all plugged into your local CVS, but just in case, no harm in mentioning it here. And finally, I would just say thank you so much for listening. It's been a delight to talk to you. And just remember that funders love confident organisations, and they really want to achieve social change. And to do that, they need you. They need your organisations, because you're the ones on the ground delivering the work on a day-to-day basis. So don't go to them cap in hand. Go to them saying, this is what we can do to help you achieve your aims, because this is the fantastic work that we're doing in our particular area. We know it makes a difference to people's lives, and you can be part of our journey with us. Thank you so much.